also later. And this meeting is also being live streamed. So you can find it on Nordic Inclusify's YouTube channel. Then later we will post a link everywhere. I really hope that you're going to keep the chat active for questions and conversation. Typically what we also do is that we can share our LinkedIn profiles in the chat so everyone can also network with each other. But yeah, keep the conversation going, and at the end of the session we will have a Q&A, and then we will go over some of those questions that you posted in the chat. Just briefly about Nordic Inclusify. So Nordic Inclusify is a community. We have a Slack group, and we're a bunch of people who are very excited and passionate about DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our aim is to drive the DEI agenda forward when it comes to employer branding, talent acquisition, and employee experience in the Nordics. Our Slack group is open for everyone to join. So, we will post a link to our Slack group as well, and you're more than welcome to come and join the Slack group and have a conversation around DEI in employer branding, talent acquisition, and employee experience. But yeah, before we dive deeper into our topic, so culture add versus culture fit, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. So first up, we have Laura on the line. Laura, would you like to say a couple of words about yourself?
Oh, hey there, everyone. I'm Laura, and I am a D&I researcher and the founder of Validate. That's an agency that investigates organizational responsibility and impactful D&I efforts within different organizations in the Nordics. So lovely to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Laura. Lovely to have you here. Next up, we have Rahul. Would you like to say a couple of words about yourself?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Rahul. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. I've been here for almost 8 years now. For the past, most of the time I've been here, I've been working with the Nordic startup ecosystem scene, mostly supporting tech and high growth companies with talent acquisition side of things. So I've worked with Musician, Meet IQM Quantum Computers, and I've worked with some consulting organizations globally. And then I've just joined this week a climate tech company, Carbo Culture. So yeah, excited to be on this panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And then next up, we have Ruchi.
Hi. So I'm Ruchi. I am basically an analytics and BI professional, but I have been volunteering for people with disabilities and health condition in the field of, recruitment and how we can make workplaces better for them. And that motivated me to come up with my own startup. It's called Recruit Redefine. And yes, so I basically help people who have any kind of disabilities or special needs or health conditions to get jobs. So yeah, this is my in short.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to have all three of you in this panel. I think you have a lot of very, very interesting and valuable insights to share. But hey, to get started, I think it's always appropriate to kind of like define what are we talking about when we talk about culture fit and culture add. So Rahul, what does culture fit mean to you?
Hey, yeah, so I mean, I hear a lot of different arbitrary concepts and definitions from different perspectives. And what does culture fit mean to me? So I'm going to have it from two different perspectives. One, as a personal perspective as an employee or a candidate, and then the other maybe from the employer's perspective, because I'm kind of helping people place into. So as an employee, for me, when I'm looking at an organization, when I'm trying to join a place, I'm sincerely looking for an alignment with the mission or the North Star of the organization. What are their values? How is the communication like? So the sum total of all the interactions, how people talk and receive communication and behave. Different cultures have very different ways of being. So in a way, kind of, I'm trying to find a place where I'd be fitting in and I would feel quite happy around there. And when it comes to from so yeah, I mean, as an example there, for example, I could be I'm a staunch environmentalist, so I won't be a culture fit in like a, let's say, pro-coal lobby organization or something like that. Or there was a phase in my life when I had work-life balance as a really important thing for me. I was going through, so I was looking for an organization that wasn't most likely a startup or something. So, but yeah, thinking of it from the perspective of a recruiter. So part of my role, I've seen so many horror stories of when I was working, helping immigrants find jobs into startups. I saw a lot of organizations unintentionally like not recognizing really strong candidates. So for me, when I look for culture fit, it's basically trying to be the moderator that looks into how is the culture built with the purpose of inclusion and the absence of harm. So when it comes to the organization's language, norms, traditions, ways of dressing or something, usually that translates into expectations on other people. So when a hiring team is having certain expectations, it is part of my role to challenge that and define through that. So, those are the two different angles of culture that I'm trying to think of when you ask me this question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a culture fit is something that we have been talking about quite a lot over the past years. And it used to be at some point was like this, oh, you need to be a culture fit to our culture. And then we were like, yeah, like it's a great thing that we just want to hire all these people who are very similar to the people that we already have in the organization. So if we move further and then talk about culture add, Laura, how would you define culture add? And how does that kind of like align with culture fit?
Well, okay. I think I might even back it up a little bit more. So let's talk about like what do you mean by culture, and then we can start talking about culture add versus culture fit. Okay, culture is, as Rahul kind of pointed out, it's a lot of things. So it's about how you think. It's about what you value. It's about how you work and what you do and how all those different things are experienced and externalized, right? So there are a lot of different elements to culture. When we start talking about culture fit and culture add, it's kind of important to really consider, what exactly, you are as an organization right now and what exactly you need to be, okay? So when you start thinking about what you want to add to an organization, think about where you're trying to go as an organization. How are you trying to grow? What kind of stakeholders are you trying to reach? What kind of people are you trying to serve? Because you're going to need insight into that. You're going to need to understand, those different markets, those different kind of people, those different kind of needs that those different realities of your stakeholders, what they're going to be for your company. And to accommodate people who understand those things, to accommodate people who can grow your business and the way you want to grow, then you are going to have to grow as well. So the culture of your company is going to have to evolve to be able to support and the additions that you need in the organization. So things about like how you think, what you value, how you work, what you do, a lot of those things are going to evolve in your organization as you add new people. So you want to make certain that what you add in your organization isn't just different per se, but think about making certain that you're adding differences that are meaningful differences. It's like, hey, I got a person here who dyes their hair red. I have a person here who dyes their hair blue. Is that a meaningful difference? Maybe not so much, but think about meaningful differences in your company that you need to have, and then think about how you can support those as well with your culture. So the culture add is going to be something that you want to think about strategically, just as much as you think about your organizational growth and your organizational development.
I 100% agree, and I think it's especially important for a lot of growth companies, for everyone really, but like especially growth companies, because typically the then first people you hire, that's going to be your culture. That's your company culture then. And I think company culture is something that we often say like, oh, this is how we see our company culture. This is what we want it to be, but it might not be what we want it to be. But when you talk about culture ad, it's also a great way of like forming your company culture and really developing it to the direction you want it to develop, as you said. But hey, Ruchi, you've been working a lot with people with who have, like, for example, special needs or disabled people. And what do you think of like the need of culture ad when it comes to people with special needs?
Culture ad, for me, it's like enriching the existing culture. Today, people with special needs, when they are hired by some business or organization, they are actually bringing in a lot of innovation, different perspective, new ideas, and a lot more with them. They are the best problem solvers, if I may say, because they have faced so many challenges already in their life. So, and that is one important thing when we work for any company. So for me, it's like, it's a change, of course, but it's a change for good. It's a change for growth. It's a change for future. It's a change for prosperity. So when you have people with special needs in your organization, you are actually building up future for yourself. So this is what I would say.
Collectively, for all of you three panelists, what do you think are the challenges with both culture fit and culture ad? Like, where do you see that we actually end up having some problems or some clashes?
I can go. I was thinking there was the Stanford study by Professor Mike Hannon and some of his team members. It's a slightly older study, and I listened to it in one of the Adam Grant podcasts. And he was talking that there's 3 different blueprints a lot of startup founders. So they followed they tracked over 200 different Silicon Valley startups and tried to understand what their success journey was over the past decade. And one blueprint was that, okay, we only hire for skill. Like, this has to be this is the most important thing. We have a job description, the person can do that or not. That's all that matters, really objective. The other is like hiring for potential, that, okay, this person is a great star and this. And then the third one was hiring for culture fit. And every single startup founder that followed the blueprint of hiring for culture fit, out of 200, 100% of them were successful startups. So in a way, that was a very fascinating statistic. And then each of them actually had much higher chances for going for IPOs as well. But then when it came to culture ad aspect of things, so once they went through an IPO, they reached a certain level of stagnancy and they did not grow through. So they kind of had that unanimous culture through within the organization that kind of just stuck around there. And it's a very fascinating thought. And then when the organizations that hired for culture ad, I think he used the example of IDEO, the design firm, which is globally like really, them hiring anthropologists in the team or different, really different perspectives that bring in to kind of, which are not your typical niche roles for a particular organization. And so that brought in like a lot more diverse thought and action at a particular stage. So in a way, culture fit has its own value, culture ad has its own value, depending on the team, depending on the microcosms in the organization, depending on the whole overall organizational needs and perspectives. I think organizations need to be agile to try and understand what is needed through there. And so there's a lot of soul sourcing practice or activity that would be needed. So that's a preliminary thought I have, but maybe others have Yes,
I
Laura, you're
I
itching
know,
to
I
say
love this.
something. You're gonna
I know. I was like,
you're
I
gonna
love
tear
this.
it apart,
No,
definitely.
no, no, no. No, first, I love that study, not just because
Yes.
they're from my university, but also just because, I mean, I do like to, I work with things like diversity, equity, inclusion, but I do actually have to recognize that there are certain things that make homogeneity attractive. And this is the reason why people go for it. Okay. It is faster. It's really fast when you have everything predefined and you just kind of go, it's the assembly line of, of your organization. It kind of works at that level, right? It works faster because people know what to expect. And when you have expectation management, then people have better execution. Okay. So expectation helps towards execution. And then there's also the aspect of cohesion. And those are very, very attractive things. I don't say there's no value in culture fit whatsoever. What I do say is that honestly, depending on what you value as a company and how much you want to prioritize things like cohesion and productive friction, that's a big thing because productive friction is going to give you innovation. Your cultures are going to have different benefits for your company. So you really, really want to talk about I love we were talking about, the different things to consider there. One thing I really want to understand for people or make people understand is that cultural maintenance versus cultural expansion. You have to consider what phase you're in, all right? Are you trying to change how you work? Are you trying to improve it? If you're trying to make actual improvements of things, if you're trying to change things, that's when you want to start thinking about adding. Or are you just trying to leverage and replicate what you already have to be more efficient? Okay. If you're in that point where you're just like trying to leverage and replicate and and you're not trying to be critical about how to improve it, or you're not trying to reach new people, you're not trying to serve new people, you're not trying to, your markets aren't evolving, these kind of things. If you don't have any growth ambitions in terms of that, in terms of needing to think differently or be able to serve differently or produce differently, homogeneity is probably going to get you there faster. But most businesses are trying to actually do more. They're trying to go, not just replicating the same things. They're trying to do and reach new audiences. They're trying to reach new markets. They're trying to serve new people. They're trying to put out new things. And if innovation is your goal, if that's what you need, then you really need to start thinking about your culture add. Because culture isn't always scalable, to be perfectly honest. The realities and experiences that people have, different types of people you need, they'll change. And that's going to become more complex. And that's why when you talked about it works to a certain point, homogeneity and that whole culture fit thing, it does kind of work to a certain point, but it doesn't scale. And that's the problem where you got to start thinking about making certain that you add in what you need to be able to, or to be able to support the people in your organization. Your ways of working are going to have to evolve. What you're doing, how you're doing it's going to have to evolve. The people that you add in are going to have to bring in different insight, different perspectives. If your company is really trying to improve, is trying to adapt, is trying to do better. So different perspectives, different stages,
How would you say, Laura, this works in a bigger organization? So obviously we talk a lot about growth companies and startups and so on, but say we have a multinational company with 10,000 employees, or even smaller ones, 500, 1,000 employees. Do you think there is one set culture that kind of that all the employees can say that this is our company culture in such a big company? Or are there just multiple subcultures inside the organization?
Absolutely. There are multiple subcultures. Your organization is never monolithic. Your customer support department is not going to be run in the same way as your engineering department. It's not going to be run the same way as your marketing department, or, there are different kinds of, there are functional cultures. There are going to be different cultures from geographic cultures. You're going to have, there are different perspectives, different demographics are going to have, that they're going to bring in. The question is, when we talk about culture, like I said, it's a lot of different things, right? It's how you think, it's what you value, it's what you do, it's how you're working, how you're supporting, these kind of things. Those are all different aspects of culture. You're never going to have uniformity across your entire organization, right? So you could take an aspect of culture, like what you're trying to do, your vision, as Rahul was saying, your North Star. That could be a great thing that you could try to fossilize. That could be something, or try to make sure it's consistent. But realistically, people are trying to do different things in your organization. So how they do different things and how they work is going to have to adapt. It's not going to be the same thing. And trying to push that on people and saying, this is exactly how that works in every department, every function, every way, usually doesn't work so well.
And how would you go about, I think like whenever we start any of this work, like talking about culture at Culture Fit, we always need to obviously define what is our culture. So what is the best way, like for organizations who are here today listening, what's the best way to start defining what is your culture?
There's frameworks for that. Laura, it was so nice to hear. I love the word productive friction. I think it sparked through a lot of things, but there's so many different frameworks. I mean, you begin with like defining your values, beliefs, behaviors, which is like the foundational one. Develop like a set of norms and expectations from employees that comes through policies, then identifying key elements, purpose, mission, and engaging employees in the process of like designing culture, incorporating feedback, creating culture audits. There are different frameworks for that as well that help you kind of understand the tool. But that's nothing that I have actually extensively worked on, so I don't have a heavy opinion on that. But maybe Ruchi, Laura might have some more thoughts on that as well. Yeah.
I love to hear from Ruchi, but I can jump in as well.
So I believe culture differs from organization to organization, and what we are actually trying to achieve, like if there is an organization, if it's mission driven, it will have some different culture. Again, even I'm not the best person to define culture, but when my organization grows big, I want to feel my employees feel motivated and to work. They feel happy. They feel happy when they come to work. They share the similar vision, and they also are resilient. So these are the qualities that I would want to see in the culture that I develop within my organization. But I think the initial question that Sophia had about the biggest obstacles when it comes to culture add. So when I talk about accessible jobs or jobs for people with special needs, so what are the obstacles that play a major role are some of the biases towards people with special needs. There is some kind of bias already exists everywhere, that if a person is disabled, then the person might not be able to work. Disability is considered as inability to work. They are always questioned about their productivity, and there are organizations, they don't realize the need of incorporating accessibility in their culture. Accessibility should be the second nature of the organization, because it not only help people with disabilities, it also helps the people who are already working within the organization. So these are some things I would like to add. Yeah,
I love that, actually. One thing I'm so happy to have you on this panel for is that to spotlight accessibility, because one of the major things we talk about culture is, honestly, we talk about so we're starting how people work in your company. How do they work? How do they thrive? And an important thing about that is, are people empowered to thrive in your organization? How are they empowered to do so? Okay, everybody that you bring in to your company should add value. Everybody should be an add. Okay, if you have someone that's not adding, they're subtracting. That's the math of a company. Okay, so people are all adding something. You bring people in because they are adding something, but you have to make certain that your organizational formula is configured to make certain that that's actually, that they can actually add to your company, to your teams. They can actually do these things. And that formula is going to differ per person. Everybody is going to need something different to be able to thrive. Everybody gets accommodated in some way, right? Or not accommodated in some way. But I think that's one thing we start trying to make this broad brush understanding of culture, like how we work and how we do these things. We forget that we are working with people, right? And when we talk about prioritizing things, we need to prioritize the people there. Because when we start talking about, we've got this formula of culture and we try adding people into that equation and it doesn't add up, that's because we forgot to think about what those individual people need. And so when we start talking about accessibility and we start talking about diversity in general, there are going to be different needs, but that is, part of what a company has to consider and, be critical about when it comes to its culture, to make sure that that culture is evolving with the people that they bring in, that a company evolves to be able to include different people that they are going to need, to make certain that, everybody there is plugged in and empowered to keep powering that business.
Yeah, and I also believe like empathy should be a critical part of any culture. Yeah, because in these tough times when we are facing like pandemic and there is some war situation and inflation and there are so many things going on in people's lives. So it's very important that empathy is the critical part of any culture, any organization. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think like very, very interesting points, and especially the one that you said about Rahul and Laura, you were discussing this like culture fit at a certain point in the company's life cycle, and then culture add if you really want to like bring in innovation. But I think a question from our community was that that culture add is sometimes easier said than done, because it's very important that we have teams that work well together. So what kind of like concrete tips would you have for balancing the need for a person that fits into the team and who can still add something new and challenge the old views?
By the way, I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful question. Rahul, you had jumped in on that one. I see you kind of.
So the question is, how would I balance the need between assessing, like how much would they add the value, and at the same time would fit in to get the balance pointed out there?
Yeah, just have like a well-functioning theme, but at the same time having those different perspectives and those like challenging the old way of thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, professionally, most of the people I've worked with, except for just a few, I think are really nice. So in a way, like if I'm spending 2,000 hours per year with a colleague, so let's say if I'm hiring someone in my team, I'm going to be spending considerable amount of my waking life with that person. So in a way, I'm trying to look at, okay, they are going to fit in with my personal fits and values, and at the same time add and show me more perspectives and show me different. So in that sense, I would say like it would be important to understand from their perspective of what is their impression of us as a company. So when I do a preliminary conversation with people, I always ask them like, okay, how much do you know about us, and what's your perception? I would love to hear like, what do you think about us, and where did you get to know about us, and what are the stories you've heard about us? So they have a certain impression that I'm trying to see and analyze. That is that aligned? Is that something that we are trying to project? Is that something that we are trying to practice as an individual, as an organization, on each level? So there I'm listening for, and then like asking towards later steps in the organization conversations that, okay, you've spoken with X number of people in the interview process, like let's say 7 people. What's your perspective of a company's cultures or values or mission? And do you think we could improve that in any form? And there I'm actually looking for candor that brings towards like more of a positive change rather than the strive to fit in perfectly. Because there are people who would be like, oh, this is the perfect fit. This is the great team. This is yes for me. This is yes for me. And that's it. But then sometimes people who do express candor, that sometimes also explains that there's something that could be expected. I'm trying to think of an example. I was trying to hire a talent acquisition person at my previous role in my team. And I've spoken with quite a lot of recruiters in the industry, and there were good examples. There were like good candidates that I had through, but then there was one candidate who had strong potential and came through a service design background, who had a lot of transferable skills that were completely relevant to the particular role. And I wanted to take the risk, and I wanted to take the bet that see how that person, so that person had the skill fit, that person had the cultural fit, like I would enjoy the conversations and I could trust the individual. But at the same time, they brought in completely new perspectives and new ways of looking into it. So maybe towards the later steps in interviews, like having a thorough debrief process where we try and assess that, okay, objectively, this is what we were looking for, and taking feedback from people that, okay, this is actually additional around over here. Maybe a slightly vague answer over here, but I'm trying to think of more examples through which a lot of them will come through, and I'll come back later on in the conversation. But yeah, I don't want to do a monologue.
Here's the thing. I love when we talk about teams. Oftentimes we think about culture at the company level and such, but realistically, people live and exist in their teams and their organizations primarily. So let's think about that dynamic. So when we start talking about, like, someone had that question of how do you make sure that you get that culture ad, and that's hard because people are different and that kind of, yeah, that is true. But here's the deal. You want your team to be compatible, not necessarily always comfortable, okay? Because we're talking about that productive friction. That's the stuff that sparks those new ideas. That's the stuff that gets you going. So what you want to look at in the compatible level, you want to think about, do they have the skills that you need? You want to have that collection of different skills. You want to have that collection of different experiences and insights that's going to be relevant for your goal. But here's something what you also think about. Think about your needs and flex points of the different people in your team. Okay, I want you to consider, what does each team member need? And what can they adapt to support their team members in levels of collaboration, execution, and to thrive. Okay, so everybody's going to need different things to be able to collaborate, to execute, and to thrive. Make certain that it's clear about what each person's going to need for those different things. All right, and this isn't just people with different kind of abilities. It's different diverse backgrounds, experiences, yada yada. Everybody's going to have different things in those things. All right, make sure that what that team can provide, think about what they can flex, what are those different things that you can actually add? How can you change? It doesn't have to be that the person next to you needs the exact same things that you need, all right? What can you accommodate? What can you be able to support with? That's that combination of compatibility you really think about, okay? So it's not going to be where you're going to give the same support and the same things to everybody. That's clear. You're going to have a lot more transparency in terms of, in terms of needs, in terms of what people can accommodate and change. That's going to be good. Your communication skills are going to have to be up there. Your empathy is going to have to be up there to be able to execute a more diverse team, obviously. But the benefits are also up there if you can pull that off. And that does mean you're going to have to be, once again, clear about what are the needs to collaborate, to execute, and to thrive. What are the flex points that each person on that team has? And that's how you're going to assemble that team to make sure that unit actually is a viable unit. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. And I think one of the key aspects here is also the how do you educate your leadership in the organization? Because I think leadership has a very big role in facilitating those conversations, facilitating the teamwork. And at least something that I've seen with my own team is that when you're able to kind of like, when you're able to actually bring it to people's attention that like, hey, here we do have different views, and we probably look at this matter from different perspectives because we come from different backgrounds and we come from different kind of like mindset and thinking. It also helps people to analyze the other person, because then we don't look at the person. We're not like, oh, like me and this person, we have a conflict, but it's rather that our opinions are different. I don't have a conflict with this person, but our opinions are different, and we come from a different different culture. We might have like a different background, and I think that's something that is very, very important, that we also like really facilitate those conversations. We help people to become aware of their own self and their own way of thinking and so on. And I guess this, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you were taking a breathing break. I actually just remembered something while you were talking about this and on the assessing between culture fit and culture add and things. I saw a really fun question on TikTok actually, and I started using that quite often, both when I'm interviewing for a company or when I'm interviewing a candidate. And that question was, tell me about someone in your team or organization that is completely different than you. And I love to see how people answer. If I'm joining an organization, if the manager goes and leans back and goes into a very dismissive way of talking about someone, there's a red flag or a yellow flag or something that comes up to me. But in case if I kind of look at that individual that, they have some mindfulness in looking at things from a different lens and applying what they've learned to make it work better, or if there's like a non-dismissive process for understanding and assessing like different viewpoints and comparing with their own, and if they lean forward, I have this one team member, and that kind of gives me a completely different subtle line through things. So I hope I didn't take it off the tangent, but I kind of wanted to kind of align through around there on the topic while we were there, in case if we were going to change the question.
No, I love that. Can I actually, I'm going to take it further
Yes.
down the rabbit hole. One thing I would say is, I love asking that question, but one thing I always love to make sure that's an impactful question. So when you start asking managers this question in particular, ask them this: if you're looking to evaluate who has great managerial potential, who's a person how are they thriving as a manager? Are they actually being able to do well in that role? A good thing to ask is, how are people who are maybe demographically different, or people who have different abilities or disabilities, how are they thriving in your team? How have you grown those people? How have these people, performed in your team? And when people start considering that the realities and experiences of other people matter to them and to their performance, oh my goodness, you'd be amazed by how quickly suddenly people start caring about other folks in your company. Yeah. Empathy can be manufactured in some ways. Okay. Yeah. And that's a thing that, you got to think about in your company, your culture. Culture is something that happens naturally, right? It happens in the sense of, it is something that will exist. People are going to work in some kind of way. People are going to think in some kind of way. People are going to value and believe things in some kind of way. But if you want to make certain that it is non-toxic, if you want to make certain that it is compatible with your organization and its goals, if you want to keep that aligned, you want to make certain that people are going in the right way to keep your business and your teams going as they need to work, then you're going to start measuring stuff. Okay. And when you start measuring things and you start looking at, what are some things you can take a look at? The things that you prioritize, that's the culture that you want to reproduce. Okay. So if you're going to start prioritizing and monitoring how different people are thriving, if you want to start monitoring who gets included, who has access, who doesn't, these kind of things, then suddenly you're going to see that's a part of your culture that sticks around a lot longer and, tends to boost your business a bit better in the long run.
Yeah, really, really, really great points. And I think it's there's a great segue to our next bigger topic, which is obviously biases. And since we are a community around recruitment and employer branding, I think there's a lot we could talk about hiring, and especially like this culture add versus culture fit when it comes to hiring. But maybe I would like to start with Ruchi. So obviously you worked with people who have disabilities or any kind of like health conditions and so on. What do you think are some of the benefits of like hiring people with disabilities, and if you can give some examples of this, and how do they contribute to culture add versus culture fit?
we people with disabilities are, considered the most loyal ones, right? And they somehow, this is the big challenge for companies to the retention rate, to keep the employees stick to the company. So if the people, with disabilities, according to some research, they are the most loyal to the companies. And examples, like I have come across some colleagues in my career, like they have been working with some organization for past 37 years. So like that colleague is one big example, and she is suffering from ADHD. And she has she has been a great addition to the team as well. So yeah, this is some of the example I can highlight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just quickly say one quick thing about that
Yeah.
question. It seems almost a little bit problematic sometimes when we start asking, what's the advantage of hiring this group of people, or why should we hire this, as if we have to justify the existence of certain people, or like that, it has this kind of weird feeling. It's like the sense of that, like, oh, what's your worth as a person kind of thing. You hire people and they can be disabled, they can be not disabled, they can be from different experiences or whatever. They have value as people, okay? And they have value as professionals, period. And it's not to say that someone has to be above and beyond a superhuman to be able to, like, be worthy of employment in your organization. Nobody else has to jump those hurdles. No one else has to be like this super person to get a job in your company. Don't put that burden on them. But the thought is going to be, this person is going to add something to your company, like everybody else in your company is going to add something to your company. This person might need different things to be able to add that value in your company. Okay, adjust. That's the thing that you do. And, but this whole thing of saying that, what's the value of adding this person versus,
I somewhere agree with Laura, because I know many people. I know somebody like who needs wheelchair for daily functioning, but that colleague is also like there from 20 plus years, and I have always heard great feedbacks about those colleagues. So it's just that I don't know which example to highlight, to be honest, but I know like people with disability, especially autism, they are highly, are proven to be best to perform great in specialist roles, especially when it comes to data science and AI. And so there are a lot of stories about people.
I personally would also stay away from the length of tenure example. I would feel quality of tenure versus length of tenure. So I have a friend, he has cerebral palsy and is an incredibly intellectual person. It is quite difficult to keep him entertained with one problem, because he would solve the problem and he'll move on to. So he would hop jobs every 6 months, but the 6 months that he would spend with an organization would be substantially transformational for that space where he would be. And so not necessarily saying retention is the thing. I would say definitely like just the added value an individual would bring through around for whatever. I really like, for example, that is definitely important, that organizations need to create storytelling and narratives around these examples and recognize these things. Most recently, I was skimming through different blogs and I saw IBM did a great example of identifying people with people on the spectrum, people with disabilities, and how they've been contributing within the organization, maybe bringing in a little bit more recognition over there, because that adds to the culture and the story, not just within the organization, but also kind of massive names like IBM and others. They also lead through the pack. They also kind of create trends and have other stories and then make space. So when it comes to biases, people start acknowledging and understanding and having a bit more reflection towards biases. I think biases will always exist in some form or the other, but mitigating those biases would get a bit better, and the maturity level of coming to that would get better through. So that's a thought that I have through.
I think it's a consideration of that. If you're kind of wondering about like, how do you know if you have biases in the space, or how do you know if you're thinking about this through a bias lens? If you've never had to think about, you have this able-bodied employee, or this person who's a local talent, or if you're talking about demographically homogenous in this area, you could say something like an able-bodied white man, in the space. If you've never had to ask that person, so what do you think what are you going to bring to this? If you've never had to think about like, so what's your value, of bringing in you as a person? But you're thinking about that more heavily for somebody who's demographically different, then that's a point where you might have some biases where you're thinking about, you might assume that this person already has that value, or that, you might just leave it at the level of their competence, which everybody needs to bring to the role, of course. But if you don't start questioning at that deeper level for them as well, then you probably got some level of bias. You're like, is it worth bringing this person in? If you didn't ask it for them, then think about why you would be asking that for somebody else.
And I think like for someone coming from the recruitment space, it's a very problematic discussion. I think it's good that the discussion has started. So we talk about DEI a lot more than we did some years ago, and especially in Finland. And then one of the things that we often encounter working in recruitment is exactly this, like thinking, for example, that companies get it like, like we need to attract more people with disabilities, or we need to attract more women, or we need to attract this or this group. And then you're always kind of like, my question is like, do we really need to kind of like attract more of those groups, or should we take down the barriers for those people to come into the organization? Because it's exactly like you said, that we hire for talent. We don't hire for disabilities. We don't hire for gender. We don't hire for anything like that. We hire for talent. We hire for culture fit and culture add combined, and we hire for great performing teams. We hire for innovation. And that's why we should rather look at the organization internally, like how can we better facilitate it for all of those people coming from different backgrounds and from different go ahead.
I actually want to interject. I do think at certain levels you should be thinking about hiring for diversity. And I'm going to say why. I've worked with companies that are in different spaces that are catering to, let's say, for instance, if you talk about delivery companies or food things, etc. And if you have a team, for instance, that is just a bunch of guys that are, young dudes from a certain region, and they're building that service for groups of people that are not like them, and they have no idea about any of the realities of people like them. You absolutely need to hire for diversity, because that is, in a sense, your business. You need to make certain that you have the diverse insights and experiences that are going to be relevant for your thing. So you could talk about just having a talent and such. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But you also need to have relevant insight and experience as well, sometimes. And these things do come up as being relevant quite often when you're building a business, when you're building out services, when you're trying to actually support different groups of people,
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I think it's like, it's a combination of those two. You need to hire for talent, and then you need to kind of like take down those biases that you probably have as an organization about like, okay, we need to just hire, like we need to get more disabled people into our organization. It's more like you need to really look at yourself as an organization and then start building the diversity agenda as well. But I think this is a great segue actually for you, Laura. So what do you think are the biggest pitfalls in the recruitment process that might prevent even a well-intentioned company from hiring more diverse types of candidates? You're muted.
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, the biggest pitfalls for the recruitment side of things. Okay, 3 things that would kind of just pop. One thing that happens quite oftentimes in the whole discussion of the culture fit versus culture add, and this discussion, people oftentimes benchmark based on a person that previously held a role. Okay. And people often are going to benchmark based off the people they already have there. And that's problematic if you're trying to have an ad situation, because that's going in the replication mode as opposed to thinking about, this is the problem that this role is trying to solve. There are 1,000 ways you could solve it, generally speaking. But if you're just trying to model it off of the thinking and the person and the personality that you had previously, you're not going to get different. You're not going to get those new perspectives. And that's going to be problematic. Another thing would be people oftentimes don't actually know what they're looking for to begin with, to be perfectly honest. I've seen a lot of companies, when you look at the recruitment side, they have either very vague criteria or like they don't have set questions or an understanding of how to gauge what they're looking for. So they wouldn't really kind of know, they wouldn't know it if they had it in some ways. And in that case, people are oftentimes going with their gut feeling. Okay, and that's a big thing. So like when people are going with their gut feeling rather than looking for a demonstrated or documented criteria, that's going to be problematic. And that means more likely than not, you're going to start relying on comfort versus competence. And you're going to start looking to repeat rather than to improve. And those are problematic things. We're looking to actually go into that culture add mode as opposed to culture maintenance, you know?
Yeah,
I would
great point.
like to add to Laura's point about comparison. I have a candidate, like that candidate has cerebral palsy, and he's looking for a job. And the biggest challenge he faces is like about productivity. He's assumed to be less productive than people with no disabilities, and this is one of the biggest obstacle for him at present. So yeah, these kind of things exist.
Yeah, I think bias is definitely biases. We all have biases. It's impossible to avoid them.
Stereotypical biases as well sometimes. Like, for example, marketing, there's a long history of rewarding confident talkers. So there would be two candidates. One person would be charismatic, the way they would tell and speak. And I've seen people who are introverted, but highly analytical and highly thoughtful, thrive and lead multi-million euro budgets for marketing and do like obscene connections. So some of these examples. And then the one that Laura mentioned, let's hire a clone of X, or sometimes some sillier ones as well. All of the managing directors play lacrosse or squash or something. So that's why we are looking for somebody who's a squash player, and he'll do awesome here. Okay, he plays squash, and that would be fine. And so some of these, at the end of the day, these are people that are making people decisions, and people are absolutely flawed. And that's where like a recruiter's role comes in to kind of keep an eye out for that. Hey, and I think what Laura was mentioning kind of went into how to mitigate all of those biases through as well. But maybe that's a different dimension.
Yeah, I find it astonishing that when you read like different job ads and you see that like there is for example, a position that requires a lot of like detailed orientedness and ability to work alone and kind of like, for example, reviewing text or something like that. And then you have like great social skills and you're like, okay, so this person works like 95% alone, just working with like written text. Why do they need great social skills? And it's just that like our work life nowadays favors certain qualities in people, which acts against diversity, because not all of us have great social skills, and that's fine. And we should be able to accommodate the people who have not great social skills as well. I mean, they have a place in this society, in the workforce.
There was a really silly one I heard in my network. Some hiring team manager commented, "This person's not vaccinated." That was like one of those newer ones. And this is a fully remote role. How do you expect this person to be needed throughout? So my colleague kind of whipped their ass and made sure that like,
it's the same when if a person is in a wheelchair and then you, for example, offer full remote. and you're like, well, this person is in a wheelchair. How are they going to come to our Christmas party? And you're like, it's a full remote position. How about we accommodate the Christmas party so that this person can join if they want to join?
Exactly.
So it's really weird.
I
But
think
maybe
this is where that
oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, sorry. This is where that cultural aspect comes into. We start thinking about what are you going to prioritize in the culture. If you're going to prioritize the ways of working, that's almost always going to be like your downfall. In that sense, where you say this is how we must work as an organization. How you work should be absolutely tied to why you work, okay, and what you're trying to do. And as soon as you start fossilizing that aspect of your culture, you become a fossil as a company. All right. And so these are things where you start thinking about when people are not willing to flex on certain things. If there is not a good reason, about your how that you're doing things, you are just, you're going to be missing out on a lot of the ad that is going to add value to your company. So those are things where you really want to think about which aspects of your culture do you want to flex on, which aspects do you want to fossilize. Never fossilize that how, in my opinion.
It's a great tip. We have 3 minutes before we move into the Q&A. So everyone online, feel free to use the chat. I would be more than happy to get some questions in. There's already some that have been sent to me previously, but before we move into the Q&A, final question for all of you panelists. So now let's get as concrete as possible. So Rahul, what are the best practices to avoid biases in recruitment process? What would you say?
Four steps. One, structure for success. So exactly know what the job description is about, what Laura mentioned before. So have a structured kickoff process to understand what is expected from this role. Collect data. Not having data produces problems. It can create ambiguity. It can help lead you to make bad decisions. Evaluate subtle messages. We interact with people that are similar than ours. I would be interviewing someone and my mini schnauzer dog would come through and the other person would be like, oh, I have a mini schnauzer as well. And instantly a bias is generated around there. So push ourselves and try and have and then hold everyone accountable. That's the fourth one. So justify your decisions. Question your first impressions, write down why you are making a decision when you do that. And when there's a debrief meeting happening through, have a culture that can be fostered in such a way that everybody can kind of give sincere feedback and hold others accountable without like making them feel like shit. Oh, you made this decision because you're biased. You like this person because it's a clone of that, or you like the communication style because you clicked with them or something. So it's not the thing. You have to kind of dig more deeper. So holding accountable everyone is super important. But yeah, that's my kind of formula for that. Others.
Well, I think those are absolutely great tips. I would maybe add one more, which is that you should definitely take into use this interview boards where you analyze like what are the things that you're actually looking for in a person. And then everyone who is participating in interviews fills it out individually before you discuss with each other. This is a very simple thing that you can do in recruitment process. That's
the rubrics for grading. And that's what I meant by like collect data. So yes. Okay, perfect.
And then sorry, Laura. You want to go ahead?
No, I do love that. That's actually a beautiful thing. One thing I would say, you can't vote for inclusion without being inclusive to begin with. So if you haven't had the kind of board, if you hadn't had diverse input in terms of like, what's the criteria you're going to look at? What are you going to look for to justify or to be able to say this is going to prove this? What's that evidence? Get different input on those kind of things, because you might find that you go into interview, you're like, oh, this person didn't check these boxes. They didn't go to this university, they didn't go da-da-da. They must not be educated in da-da-da. But, somebody else could say, actually, you know what, there's this criteria, this certification program that's actually pretty valid. That is alternate ways of thinking about this, alternate ways of proving the same thing that you're looking for. Like I said, usually 1,000 different ways of getting to the same goal, the same destination. So make certain that you get inclusive input and diverse input in terms of, what are the different ways of looking at that problem, what are the different solutions that could possibly be there, and get feedback from different people as well. So if you have those great notes, if you have great justifications, if you've written down these things, pass that on to somebody else, a colleague of yours. If they wouldn't reach the same decision that you would based off of what you wrote down, then you probably want to take a look at that one again, you know?
Yeah. How about you, Ruchi? What would you say would be your number one tip for making inclusive job ads for people with disabilities?
Start using accessible platforms for posting job ads, and the main thing is to keep the job ad precise and clear and simple. Like please don't write in the skills which are not really needed. So communication wise, and it's also good to put in if the job is open for people with disabilities, and if yes, then what kind of adjustments or arrangements do person need. And instead of having for example calls directly, it would be good to use electronic channels if there are any forms designed, or for scheduling interviews, and also those kind of things, if used, that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you. And maybe Laura, final question for you. So what's the number one thing that every company could improve when it comes to culture ad and culture fit for 2023?
I would say next year, be critical about your culture. Okay, be critical about it. Like I said, the different aspects of it, which are things that are going to help you to become the organization you need to be now, or the organization you need to be in 5 years, 10 years, etc. There are some things that are some relics from your past that you might have outgrown that are not going to help you right now, and they're not going to help you in the future. So it's going to be important that you get a little bit critical about your culture. So that way you don't become an organizational fossil through fossilizing the wrong parts of it,
Great tip. So we have a question here from Angad. So what accessibility or accessible platforms would you recommend, Ruchi?
Rectory redefined this one. Our platform is accessible even for people with vision impairment. So it's a WCGA AA+ compliant. So yes, this is one platform, but the platforms they at least follow like WCGA AA guidelines. Those are the good platform to post job ads. At least it will have a wider reach.
Thanks. Then we have another question here. So adjusting to change can often be difficult, especially in large organizations. So how can someone who is a small fish in a big pond help bring about change in their organization?
I think that depends on a lot of factors. Everybody can change something. And here's one thing that I always talk about. I do research when I ask about what's the most impactful thing that's been done, for instance, to make you feel more included. What's the most impactful thing that's been done to make you more empowered? And I'll ask these questions in different companies. And actually, the lion's share of comments almost always comes down to things that are communication related. So it'll be something like, oh, they had one-to-one talks with me, or someone actually started asking me what asking my opinions, or someone stood up for me in discussions, or they started holding the floor for me, or when I got cut off. I'm a quiet person, and when I got cut off, someone actually would say, hey, you interrupted this person. Little things like that had an impact. And those things were things that helped to change people's perceptions of the company. They actually helped change practices. A lot of things were that people mentioned and noticed were individual actions. So individuals do have a phenomenal amount of power to do something, to change something. And those little single actions do matter. Now, I am a researcher and also look at, systems and things like this. So a big thing, if you don't have the ability to change the policies in your company. Those are actually going to be longitudinally the most impactful thing you can do. Change your policies, change your practices, the protections that you have for people. But if that's not the role that you have in your company, you can make certain that your teammates are heard. You can make certain that your teammates are supported. You can ask people what do they need and how you can help them thrive. And that alone is going to change the experience for somebody in your company. That experience helps change the culture. So you can make a difference.
I can actually add to this.
Yeah.
I think reaching out is the key. That's the first step also. I was in an event yesterday, and there was this lady who had some ideas, and she, without fearlessly, she approached CEO of Kone, and she got through him, and she could immensely benefit with networking and everything, just fearlessly reaching out her ideas. So reaching out is like one big thing.
And we have a lot of talent acquisition professionals in our community, and I think like us as talent acquisition people, we have a very, very big impact in the organizations. So the one thing that I've started to implement is like whenever I'm doing a manager recruitment or a person that I know who will be hiring in their next role, I already start asking these questions in the interview process. So I'm asking them like like what do you think of culture add versus culture fit, and how do you embrace diversity? Like, have you been part of building diversity programs in your previous roles, and how do you hire? And I think these conversations are they're very powerful actually, because it gets people thinking. It's like Laura said, like as soon as you tie something into people's bonus structure or people's like KPIs, they will do whatever it takes to achieve it. So us as recruiters, we can be part of that change and also challenge the hiring managers at the organization, ask like, hey, do like how do we work around diversity around this, or how do we embrace culture add? What are the things that we need to add into our culture, etc. Yeah, Rahul, do you have any final comments about this topic?
I think it's all shared through around there. Be critical about your culture, otherwise it will become a cult. That's a catchphrase I just came up with right now. and then, like Ruchi mentioned, reaching out to people, the worst thing that could happen is get rejected, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes people will be too busy. Sometimes people might not have something meaningful, and that's perfectly okay. But yeah, I think these are really solid advices around there.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions from the audience? You can also open your microphone if you want to reach out. Okay, there's one more. So what would you advise to an upcoming digital and remote consulting cooperative to create an inclusive and rewarding culture for diverse talent? So your advice to an upcoming digital and remote consulting cooperative to create an inclusive and rewarding culture for diverse talent. It's a really good question. Yeah.
That's a pretty broad question, to be perfectly honest. One thing I would definitely say is there are lots of fantastic consultancies that you can reach out to for this one, because this is actually going to be specific to your organization. There's no one size fit all for any company. So there are lovely companies, BusinessWise. BusinessWise is one. Priyanka is actually in this chat, and she's CEO of that company. There's another company that does these kind of things as well. Day works with that. Inclusive. If you're looking to do research and something like that, I'm happy to help you out from Validate side. But the idea is you do want to make certain that you look at the goals of who you are as a company. What do you want to be? You look at where you are and where you're starting from, and then you try to specifically for your company map out what is that path that you need to get from that starting point to what your actual targets are as your organization. Okay, and there are lots of different service providers that can help you get that path for you. Okay.
From a recruitment perspective, I think the first impression of any diverse talent looking at your consulting firm would be the job description or something in case if they come across. And I found this really cool tool called Gender Decoder, and you can put your content over there, and it helps you kind of identify different biases in your language. We all have that. I was so surprised when I was writing certain things through. So that's on the first impression side of things. And then once the organization kind of, like most recently, I was working for a company that was completely distributed all over the world, and I was the only employee in Finland, and I felt extremely included. And that was basically through different clubs, through different guilds, through different rituals that were set within the organization. So maybe look at it into a kind of cumulative culture design approach to things. So whoever joins through as a talent, take their feedback into how they would like to evolve as the organization as well. So yeah.
Yes. And about that, to piggyback off of that, asking people what they need. Once again, if you want to talk about having an inclusive and rewarding culture, different people are rewarded differently. Different people need different things to be included. Ask every single person that comes into the organization what they need, and keep asking that question as you go along. You want to make certain that people have multiple opportunities to be able to give their input. You want to make certain that you have open communication. Communication is going to be a big deal in your company. If you're trying to build an inclusive and rewarding one, make certain that you take input. You don't just ask for it, that you actually do follow up with that and adapt from it. So if you want to be inclusive and rewarding, you're going to be an adaptive culture, and that's going to be something that you can absolutely start doing by asking, listening, caring, having empathy, and actually acting.
I still have another thought. So the main thing was that asking people what you need, and sometimes people from diverse cultures might not express exactly what they need, or might underexpress it because of the fear of rejection. I remember early times when I moved into Finland, I had absolutely zero flipping clue on the compensation benchmarking in the industry, in the markets. And I really lowballed myself, and people would give me job offers. But then I know that when I joined Musician, they gave me opportunity to kind of grow through, and they were like, you're actually asking way too salary for your level and for your things, and way too little. So we definitely want to kind of raise it up for you, or give. And I was positively surprised that, oh, so you're benchmarking me with the rest of the market, and I didn't know anything about all of these things. So sometimes you ask what you need. The people might say that, okay, this is what I need, but sometimes you could be realizing that, okay, they are not necessarily asking enough their worth, and give them the support through. So that's a nice thing in that sense, yeah. And this is a nice link. Angad shared the implicit bias, the Harvard one. I've tested it out before. It's a pretty cool tool to check out your own biases.
But one good thing before you, I don't ever want the last word that would be implicit bias, because from a researcher standpoint, a lot of people look at that and they think they go through these things and like, wow, oh my gosh, I am surprisingly, sexist or racist and things like this. And they have that moment, that epiphany, and they think that's progress. It's not actually, okay? So what you want to do is think about, when you get these ideas, when you get these realizations, like, hey, where is this going to come into, how we're selecting people in the company? Where is this going to come into how are we treating people in the company? So don't just stop at, wow, I have these biases. Go and think about where are these biases going to creep in and going to make a difference for the people that we have, that we get in the company, for how we treat people, how we keep them in the company, and how we grow them. And that's the most important thing, find those opportunities for interventions and then figure out those ways for doing better.
That's a really, really great advice. And we had one more question in the chat, but I think we can leave that conversation and continue it in LinkedIn or another channel. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Please join our Slack channel. We can continue the conversation there as well. And I'm absolutely sure that all the speakers are also happy to connect on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to them as well. But yeah, thank you so much for participating today.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much for having us.